As a physician, I can tell you this is something we've never had enough of for years.
This week in Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania is struggling to keep up with the need for mental health services, how the state is hoping to step up treatment access. One of Governor Shapiro's top aides resigned suddenly this week. What inappropriate behavior are former co-workers accusing him of doing to her? And lawmakers are pushing to criminalize a veterinary drug that is considered a growing deadly threat. Hello. Welcome to This Week in Pennsylvania. I'm James Crummell, and for Dennis Owens, who is out in California right now, interviewing presidential candidates. We will hear more about that in the weeks ahead. But making news this week, a senior advisor to Governor Shapiro abruptly resigned, and we're now learning he was accused earlier this year of sexual harassment. A former co-worker says Mike Verb, Shapiro's former legislative affairs secretary, subjected her to lewd and unwanted sexual advances while she worked in the governor's office. She claims Verb's behavior forced her to quit that job. Verb was a former state lawmaker and former Montgomery County police officer who worked closely with Shapiro when he was attorney general. When Verb resigned, Shapiro's chief of staff, Dana Fritz, credited Verb for work on the state budget and called him a key member of a team. Shapiro's spokesperson declined to comment directly on what he called a personnel matter, but he says the administration takes allegations of discrimination and harassment seriously. The State House was back in session this week after a lengthy summer recess. There's still a budget to finish with code bills not passed. This is putting funding streams in limbo, including for Pitt, Penn State, and Temple. House Republicans are complaining Democrats are running the show, but Democrat Paul Takak accused the Republicans of playing politics and blocking funding they would usually support.
It's a reflection of the partisanship that we're seeing so much of across the Commonwealth. We need to reduce that.
Penn State says the impasse is already impacting its employees, and more delays could have serious impacts. And after the House returned, Democratic State Representative Brian Bizzarro announced he is running for treasurer. He's also running to keep his state House seat representing Erie, which is legal to do in Pennsylvania. Current Treasurer Republican Stacey Garrity is planning to run for a second term. A bill to make major changes to the juvenile justice system is making progress in the State House. Sponsored by Pittsburgh Democrat Dan Miller, it's based on recommendations from a 2021 Juvenile Justice Task Force report. The bill would narrow criteria for trying youth as adults, raise the age for juvenile court, prioritize education for kids in the system, and promote diverting kids to community interventions instead of prosecution.
For most of the juveniles who are brought in, they have little to no prior history. And that, unfortunately for them, they end up being still brought into it regardless. And if you are a child of color in the state of Pennsylvania, the system shows worse results for you.
Yes, Kim.
The bill passed committee 14-11 by a party line vote. A drug used to tranquilize animals is increasingly showing up in the drug supply. Now some lawmakers are pushing to criminalize the illegal use of the drug. Xylazine is also known as Tranq and is often mixed with other drugs. Republican State Representative Carl Metzger says lawmakers have to do something to get it off the streets. One of the side effects of using the drug, skin wounds. Since xylazine is not an opioid, it's Narcan resistant, which is posing yet another challenge in the effort to help those using it illegally. Metzger's bill, which just passed committee, would criminalize illegal use of the drug. The drug would, of course, still be legal for veterinary use. Some lawmakers, though, are critical of the bill, saying this isn't the way to address the issue, and they'd rather see the focus be on treatment rather than punishment. A school safety program that lets students report harmful or even criminal activities is getting a boost in funding. The Safe to Say Something program has been around for 5 years. Its goal is to reduce threats in K-12 schools across the state by giving kids a platform to submit tips anonymously. State Senator Scott Martin wants to put another $100 million into school mental health related services within the program. Last year alone, around 500,000 kids went through training to understand Safe to Say. Martin says the program has helped many kids battling physical issues, but the mental health side still needs work. And speaking of mental health, professionals treating the growing number of people seeking treatment say they need more help. Dennis Owens reports.
I would say this is a massive problem.
Michaela Morrow is a licensed therapist on the front lines of mental health in PA, a state
with more than 1,500 suicides a year.
That's just the statistics for those who have completed suicide, not those who have attempted suicide, who have overdosed, who engage in active self-harm, who are also people in a lot of pain.
Pain exacerbated by the pandemic. More people now needing help. Not enough people providing it.
As a physician, I can tell you this is something we've never had enough of for years.
Human Services Secretary Val Arkush says the state's steering an additional $20 million to the counties for mental health services this year, with an understanding much more is needed. She's also stepping up recruiting.
These are incredibly caring and helpful professions. There's tremendous opportunity for professional growth, and I hope that people will look seriously at becoming a social worker or a peer specialist.
New recruits might solve tomorrow's problem, but isn't fighting today's battle. There are depressed, anxious, even suicidal clients waiting weeks or months for treatment.
It's very frustrating and sad to see how many people cannot get the care that they need.
Morrow says society must pick up the slack and be part of the solution. Check in on friends and loved ones, she says. Help them find the help they need. Advocate.
Get on as many wait lists as you can. If you find yourself on a wait list for a therapist, don't stop there. Reach out to your community, join a support group, read a self-help book, engage in a podcast, your husband.
Morrow has about 60 clients and dreams of the day that number is 0.
Goal is I don't want any clients. I want you to all go off and do your thing.
Perhaps someday. Certainly not this day.
That was Dennis Owens reporting. A reminder, if you or a loved one is struggling, there is a suicide prevention hotline. It is 988. It is manned and will be answered to get you out of crisis. 2 state representatives want to raise suicide awareness in state parks. Kristen Marcel and Casey Tomlinson want to post the suicide crisis line and other resources in state parks and forests. The lawmakers say studies show the chances of people changing their mind increase when they see a sign. State police recently dropped the college requirement for cadets, and it seems to be paying off. That requirement removed last month. In that short amount of time, state police say 1,217 people have applied for the academy. More than half of those applicants only have a high school diploma and would have been ineligible before. Now, in comparison, around 1,700 applications were received during the previous hiring cycle, which was open for a full 6 months. All right, stay with us. After the break, I speak one-on-one with Republican Senate candidate Dave McCormick. Welcome back to This Week in Pennsylvania. I'm joined now by the man who wants to take on PA's longtime U.S. Senator Bob Casey in 2024, Republican Dave McCormick. Thank you so much for being with us here today.
Hey, great to be here, James. Thanks.
So you are a familiar face to people here in Pennsylvania. You ran before in 2022 in the Republican primary for Senate. Then you lost out to Mehmet Oz by less than 1,000 votes. So why did you decide to do this again?
Well, it's the same motivation that I had for running the first time, which is I'm a Pennsylvania kid. I've born and raised here, and I've really lived the American dream. I've had everything Pennsylvania and this great country has to offer. And I think the country's headed in the wrong direction. I think it's being challenged economically, militarily, spiritually, and I think we need new leadership. And so I'm running to try to make a difference. And Bob Casey's been in office in the Senate 17 years, in public office almost 30. And in the most consequential state in the country, he's been a very unconsequential senator, and has really been a rubber stamp that has voted in line with President Biden's failed policies on many issues. So I think there's an opportunity to make a case to the people of Pennsylvania that we need new leadership, somebody who's going to shake things up a bit, someone who's going to come to Washington as an outsider. And so that's why I'm running.
Losing that vote by less than 1,000 votes, I know that had to be disappointing for you. What made you decide to jump back into this, and what's going to be different this time around?
Yeah, well, when you lose by less than 1,000 votes, you can drive yourself crazy thinking about all the things that you might have done differently. And I certainly have learned the lessons. But my life has been a lot about failing and then learning from the failure and succeeding. So whether it's walking off the mat after losing a big wrestling match, or getting fired from a job, or losing the last election, these kinds of experiences test you. They test your resilience. You learn from them, and you become better. And so I'm hoping, and I think I'll be a much better candidate this time around. And the motivation to serve is what drives me. I don't need this job. I want the job. And the reason I want it is because I think I can make a difference, and I think it'd be a great honor to serve the people of this great Commonwealth.
Speaking of that job that you're running for, you did this before, but this is a lot different circumstances. In that time when you ran before, you were in a crowded field of Republicans. Right now, you're pretty much the only one. And I know you have a long list of Republican endorsements. Do you think that matters? And do you think that's going to help you carry it, taking on Bob Casey?
Well, I certainly think it matters to be able to unite the party, and I hope that will happen. It seems to be happening. To be able to unite the party, come together, and run a really great race against Bob Casey is going to be key to success. And I think what happened is, Pennsylvania Republicans have realized that the most important thing, whatever differences we have among us, they're small in comparison to the differences that we have with the Democratic Party, in particular with Bob Casey and the progressive set of policies he's promoted. So by being able to bring the party together and then to be able to run a strong campaign focused on the issues, focused on leadership, focused on, listen, I'm sure Bob Casey's a nice guy. I'm not running against that. I'm running against the fact that he hasn't made a difference for Pennsylvanians, and that we need leadership to make a difference, and that he's been lockstep with Joe Biden. And I think most Pennsylvanians would agree that many of Joe Biden's decisions and policies have failed them. And that's the case I want to make.
One big endorsement you didn't get last time around was Donald Trump. Right. Are you looking for that this time?
Well, President Trump and I have had our differences. That's been very public. The most notable one is that he didn't support me. He supported somebody else. But I also thought that many of President Trump's policies were very, good policies and took our country in the right direction, particularly in contrast with the failed policies of Joe Biden. So I'm going to run my race. I'm going to run a race to be the senator from Pennsylvania. I'm going to mostly focus on that.
He's in a situation the way that you were, where he is now part of a crowded field. Does that endorsement go the other way? Do you support him, or is there a presidential candidate that you do support?
Well, I'm going to focus on my race, and when there's a nominee, I'll support and endorse the nominee, but I'm not going to get involved in presidential politics until then.
All right. I have more questions for you. Please
Great.
Don't go away.
I'm not
We're
going
to have
anywhere.
more on
Thank
that
you.
when we come right back. Stay with us.
Thanks.
Welcome back. I'm talking with Senate candidate Dave McCormick, and I want to talk about the issue of abortion. That's going to be a big hot button issue headed into the next election. Pennsylvania Democrats say that you are against exceptions for abortion in cases of rape or incest. Now, back in our Senate GOP primary debate, we asked you about this, and you said, quote, "I believe in the very rare instance there should be exceptions for life of the mother." So let's just clear this up now.
Yeah.
Where do you stand on this?
Well, my position throughout last campaign and this one, multiple places where it was said and recorded, was I'm pro-life with exceptions for rape, incest, and life of the mother. But this is an issue where I think we really do need to find empathy and compassion and find common ground. And there's a lot of common ground to be found. If you look across what Pennsylvanians think, whether it's a wide accessibility for contraception, whether it's additional support for adoption services, or whether it's the restrictions on late-term abortions, where it's a large majority of voters in Pennsylvania are. And so that's what I would support, finding common ground along those lines. And this is where I honestly believe the Democratic Party is out of step. And the position of abortions up until the due date, the one that Bob Casey supports and the Democratic Party supports, is really out of step. That's the extreme position. And so that's the position I'll take during the campaign, and it's consistent with what I said during the last campaign.
And Democrats, they'll push back, saying that the topic of abortion is a losing issue for Republicans. You disagree?
Well, I think it's an issue that voters care about. So if you're running for office, you have to be able to stand up and say what you think. And so I'll do that throughout. There's a number of issues that are critical to Pennsylvanians. This isn't the only one, but I'll certainly talk about it throughout the campaign.
Let's talk about the topic of residency. Critics of you say you don't live in Pennsylvania, spending most of your time in Connecticut. What do you say to that? How many days in the past year have you lived here in Pennsylvania?
Well, listen, I'm born in Pennsylvania, raised in Pennsylvania, went away from Pennsylvania to serve my country, went to West Point in the military, came back to Pennsylvania, created jobs in Pittsburgh. And then, like many Pennsylvanians, I had a great opportunity when I was working in the government to move and run a company that was outside of our great Commonwealth. But Pennsylvania has been my home. And last campaign, I spent all the majority of my time in Pennsylvania, and I am now. I live in Pennsylvania.
Where do you live?
I do. I said I live in Pennsylvania. I live in Pittsburgh. I have a home in Pittsburgh. I have a family farm that is in the town I grew up in. I didn't grow up on the farm, but I have it. And listen, I'm like many Pennsylvanians. I'm divorced, and I have my youngest child who's finishing high school. She lives with her mom in Connecticut, so I'm going to go to Connecticut to see my daughter and be a good dad. And if there's a political cost associated with that, so be it. The most important thing for you to know is this is a distraction. This is a distraction because Bob Casey and the Democrats don't want to talk about the fact that he's voted 98% of the time with Joe Biden. They don't want to talk about the lack of a consequential record as a U.S. Senator. So he's from Rubber Stamp, Pennsylvania, and I'm from Bloomsburg, Pennsylvania, and that's the way I'll talk about it during the campaign.
Okay, you brought up something there. You talked about farms. Agriculture is huge in Pennsylvania, and a big concern for many farmers is not enough young people getting into it. What would you say to the older farmers who are now having to sell their farms because of that? And what type of priority would agriculture be for you as a senator?
You know, I was just in Lancaster earlier this week. I had a roundtable with 20 farmers who were in different poultry and a variety of different industries. And there's a number of things that are creating big challenges for them. And they've really happened under the Biden administration. There's two that I'll highlight. The first is inflation. Inflation, the price of fuel, it's really been a huge, huge drag on those farmers, those small businesses. The tax code is something they're very concerned about because being able to pass on those family farms depends on maintaining some of the tax plans that President Trump put in place that are potentially at risk under a second Biden administration. And the third thing, as you said, is labor and legal labor that can support their efforts. And a big part of having these family farms being passed on to the next generation is making sure they're economically feasible. And they're not economically feasible unless we get inflation under control and have the right tax structure to support small businesses.
Very good. All right, Dave McCormick, thank you so much for being here and taking some time away from the Bloomsburg Fair to come and talk with me today. I really appreciate it. Please come back.
I will. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We'll be right back. Welcome back to This Week in Pennsylvania, and I also want to have a nice welcome to our analysts, Christopher Nicholas, Brittany Crampsey. Thank you so much for being here.
James, always good to have you here filling in for Dave.
I do my best. I want to talk to you guys about the interview we just had with Dave McCormick, and just first, your random thoughts on the interview, and then his chances against Bob Casey. Christopher.
I think he is the absolute best candidate the GOP could have. He's experienced, he's well-spoken, he's a good guy. He can at least partially self-fund. Him being the candidate here raises the profile of that race in the national GOP, which means we'll get more, resources to help out. It's always tough to beat an incumbent. What I've long said about Bob Casey is he's had good luck, not his fault, to run in very good years for the Democrats, 2006, 12, and 18. Next year seems to be kind of an even Steven cycle, not really going one way or the other for either party. So I think that'll be a change for him. And I think he's in for his toughest race yet.
I think we have to appreciate the Republicans' consistency on outsourcing Pennsylvania jobs. McCormick has a long history of that in his corporate career, and now the PA GOP is outsourcing their candidate for Senate. He's from Connecticut. He doesn't live here. He's not from here. He doesn't have a farm in Squirrel Hill. He's flying his helicopter in to do appearances like this, and it's wonderful that he came to talk to us. But I think he's pretty out of line with Pennsylvanians, and I think his answer on abortion left a lot to be desired, especially given the way that we've seen it flip seats all over the state.
His farm's in Bloomsburg. He grew up here. He got his West Point, entry here. He's created jobs here, unlike Bob Casey, who's never created one job except for his Senate staff. So I think that issue will fade into the background because that's not of the most interest to voters. Voters care about things that impact them. And I will note for the record that lots of people have different views on abortion. Just because it's different than yours doesn't necessarily in and of itself make it problematic.
Well, do you think that the residency issue is something that is going to be a big deal, or is it, as he called it, a distraction?
Oh, I do think it's important. I think Pennsylvania is a unique state. It's a provincial state. We care about being from Pennsylvania and knowing what it means to be from Pennsylvania. That's why you saw huge numbers for Biden here. Bob Casey is a beloved son of Scranton, as is Joe Biden. I mean, it matters every year. I think it's really going to matter next year when we see presidential candidates through here.
All right, I want to switch topics now to Congress and Scott Perry. Right now, between the people who are confirmed and the rumored to be running against him in the Democratic Party, there's maybe 6 or 7 people. Every year, it feels like he is the one that's like everyone's watching because they can take him out, and they don't. Is this year any different, Christopher?
Well, I'm gonna parrot what Brittany and Danielle said in 2022 when we had big crowded Republican primaries for governor and Senate, and they said that was a bad thing. So I guess it's a bad thing, right, Brittany? that there's 6 or 7 candidates, including the one you're working for, that want to go after Perry. Look, this is a district that has been drawn to be competitive. It's on the edge of being competitive. I understand why Democrats want to kind of put their lives on hold and run, but 6 or 7 is really, to me, astonishing. I thought he might have 2, and now Brittany just told me beforehand it's going to be 7. So, get a program, folks, so you can keep everybody straight.
It's a huge field, truly. And for something like a congressional seat, you don't see this very often. But what's, I think, uniquely interesting about this seat is that people are switching from Republican to Democrat to run against him in this primary. At least 2 that we know of at this point were Republicans until 2020 or until 2022 and are switching to run against him because they don't believe that Scott Perry represents them or represents their party, and they don't think that he should be representing this area anymore. So you don't see that a whole lot.
A couple of them don't even live in the district.
You don't have to for Congress.
One candidate parachuted in his first time really in Pennsylvania ever. So it'll be interesting to see how that issue plays, since you think it's going to be such a big deal in the
Well, just a
Senate race.
distraction.
Lots of parachuting going on. All right, that's going to do it for us. Thank you so much for watching This Week in Pennsylvania, and we'll see you back here next week for This Week.